Hello and welcome to this three-part series on predicting the future with machine learning. In part 3, Eric Boyd from responsiveX shows you how to consume and visualize your Azure Machine Learning models.
We're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about operationalizing Azure Machine Learning models, and we're going to talk about consuming these Azure Machine Learning models from applications, from different kind of reporting tools and that sort of thing. So with that, this is my Azure Machine Learning Studio workspace. In the previous webinar, we talked through how to get here. So if you're not familiar with how to get here, how to create an Azure subscription, and how to navigate to your Machine Learning Studio workspace, feel free to watch that last webinar kind of on demand, and we'll walk you through all of that. But I don't want to just recap that. I want to just dive right in. So with that, let's take some models that we already have. So we've created the models in the last session. So I'm going to take this automobile price prediction. And this is a draft of the model. So this is really an experiment that we have, walking through, cleaning up some data. You'll see we're cleaning, removing rows that don't make sense, that have empty values and that sort of thing. And we get down to, this is the algorithm that we're using for our model. We're training it, scoring it, evaluating it, and what have you. Now, if I want to, I've already taken this model and saved it out as a trained model. So you'll see I can save this, right-click on the algorithm here and say Save as Trained Model. I've already done that, and so what I'm going to do is save this draft as demo model. And so here, I'm going to delete these things right here, and I'm going to bring in the model that I've created. So I right-clicked on that, and I said Save Trained Model, and now over in my Trained Models, I have this automobile price model that I've created. So here, I can bring my data back down to score model. I can connect score model back up to our model, and we have our model again here in our machine learning workspace in our experiment. So if I run this, it should flow through without any issues, without any errors. We should see predictions on automobile price. So all is well. If I visualize this data set, here are the 193 rows we passed in, and this is what we predicted for price. So you'll see our scored labels coming back out. All right, so now with that, what I want to do is expose this such that I can connect to this from other applications. And this is one of the huge advantages of Azure Machine Learning over other sort of machine learning tools and data science sort of tools. So oftentimes when you're building a model like this, you're using languages like R or Python, but the end consumer may be an iOS developer who's building a mobile app and doesn't know anything about R or Python. And so to operationalize that model, it takes a bit of work in translating or somehow facading and encapsulating the scientific sort of piece of it and exposing it out to the developer. But Azure Machine Learning simplifies this by making it easy to just expose a web service. So if we come down over here on our left-hand pane and we find web service, you'll see a couple of things. You'll see a web service input, and you'll see a web service output. Now what I want to do is expose these two things. Before I do this, I'm going to save this model. I'm going to leave this intact, save this, and then I'm going to save this as a different experiment. So we're going to call this demo web service. So I'm going to drag this input over here on the left-hand side and this output from the left-hand side over here on the right. I'm going to connect the input into what's going into this score model module. So this is our data coming in. I'm also going to just get rid of this evaluate model, and I am going to select some columns. In this case, I just want the prediction to come out of our model. So I'm going to choose the scored labels and probabilities. And I'm going to connect that up to our output. We have now, by dragging a couple of modules over into our experiment, we've set this up to be a web API that we can call from any sort of app that can talk HTTP. So I can talk to it from Excel, from other reporting tools, from desktop applications, web applications, mobile apps. It doesn't really matter, but I've now taken the steps to operationalize this model as a web API. I'm going to run this, make sure all is well, and then we're going to deploy it. It's looking good, almost looked good. What happened? Have an error. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's do this. Let's just get rid of that. Let's just keep scored labels and run that. Not sure why that's erroring, but that's okay. All right, all is well. So now that we have this, everything's green. We got a good check mark up here in the top where it says finished running. We can deploy this web service. Now there's two options. There's new and classic, and this just refers to the two different sort of versions of Azure, if you will. So classic is what we've always used. We're actually looking at what looks like the Azure Classic portal. So the old management portal that has this sort of design. Then there's the new management portal that has the new tile-based sort of look. And so that's what this is referring to. Is it in the classic environment or the new environment? In this case, I'm just going to deploy classic. It doesn't really matter. It's just going to show it in a different spot in Azure. There are some underlying differences, but for this purpose of this demo, it doesn't really matter. So, all right. So now we have a web API. We can test this web API or test this model, and we can type in some things here. So Acura, sedan, wheelbase. I'm not even sure what a real wheelbase is, but we're going to enter in some numbers. And horsepower, we want a really, really fast car. And peak RPMs, highway MPG, that's got to be pretty bad to be a fast car. What's the price? So we'll see that this computes the cost right here interactively, the price of our car. So we really got a supercar here apparently, because we're at $104,000 for our car is our predicted price. So that's pretty cool. So we are basically calling that web API through this little test interface right here. But if we wanted to consume this from our app, you'll see we have this API key, but what's the endpoint? So over here you have two options. You have a request response and a batch execution. You can actually call this Azure Machine Learning model in two ways. One, just like it sounds, request response, so interactively one at a time. Or I have a batch of data. I have a ton of records of data, and I want to let the machine learning model compute over that batch of data. And the way you do that is a little different than request response, so we'll just start here. All right. So this is the documentation for our API. So here's an endpoint that we have. Here's the inputs and outputs into this API. And all we have to do is consume this with that API key, and we now have access to call this API from our applications. To show you this in action, I'm going to flip back over and open this up in Excel. So this is downloading an Excel workbook for me. I'm going to hit Enable Editing, and you'll see over on the right-hand side, there's this nice Azure Machine Learning pane that shows up. And it's pre-populated with our API, the Automobile Price Prediction. So we're going to choose that. We're just going to tell it we want to use sample data. And this is going to populate some sample data for us. We're then going to tell it where the data is that we want it to do computation over. And then I'm going to give it a cell to put the output in. So in this case, I1, and include headers. We'll say auto predict. And this is going to interactively call back out to the API. So if I hit predict here, you'll see there's our scored, there's our pricing. So this is what the model is estimating based on everything we're putting in. So I come back over here and I do, our crazy cars. We had a wheelbase of 200, so that doesn't make sense. But you'll see this scored label changing over time, and this is our price prediction. So if we come in here and say, let's give it an engine size of 250, horsepower of 500, you'll start to see that increasing. If we come back down and say, the engine size is really 150 and horsepower is 300, and our highway MPG tanks and it's only 12, you'll see the price changing. And so this is one of the ways that we can consume our machine learning models is just right from Excel. And so we can create functions in Excel that call out to that web API, bring in that data, and let our analysts use the tools that they're familiar with, like Excel, to pull in that data. We could also, again, connect from any applications. We have a customer that uses Azure Machine Learning models directly from a mobile app for their sales team, that sort of thing. So you can definitely do that. But this is just calling it from Excel. So that's one great client that business analysts love to use. All right. With that, we flip back over and let's look at one other model here, and then I'm going to show you Power BI. So I have an experiment over here. I mentioned a targeted marketing scenario earlier. And this is a model we built in the last session, an experiment we built in the last webinar. All I've done, I'm actually going to show you the evolution of this. So in our first draft of this, we created an experiment that looked like this. And you'll see there are two different algorithms here. We ran our data through two different algorithms, a boosted decision tree, which is an ensemble model, and a two-class Bayes point machine. And the reason we did that is we wanted to figure out what algorithm would be most accurate and most precise. So we ran both of these through this evaluate model, and we can see a rock diagram here showing us which algorithm is actually returning us better predictions. And so the closer to one on both axes we get here, the better we are. And so you'll see the one on the left, the scored data set, is the best of the two. And so we come back here, this side here is what's giving us the better predictions. So then came back to that draft, saved it out as a model, and I got rid of all of that on the right, and I saved that out as our trained model that we're going to just reuse. So now we have a trained model. It's simplified. We're just bringing in data. There's our trained model from our score model, and we're evaluating it from there. So if we look at this data, what we will see is this is predicting whether we should send a marketing promotional piece to a customer or not based on their response. And so you'll see here we have a label, a scored label that's basically yes or no, 1 or 0. Should we send a marketing promo or not? Are they likely to buy after we send this marketing promotional material, this mailer basically? So that's what we're trying to do, is predict based on the data we know for the rest of our customers, should we send marketing material to them. So I took that model and save this. Took that model and then operationalized it as a web service. And all I did to do that was bring in this web service input, this web service output. I selected the columns that I wanted to come out of the score model, which is really the scored labels and scored probabilities, and then wired that up to the web service output. And then again, I just deployed web service here at the very bottom. When I do that, over here on the web services side, if I click web services, you'll see there's my targeted marketing web service. Just like our auto price prediction web service we just created, there's the targeted marketing web service. So I'm going to click that, and you'll see we have the same sort of thing, an API key, request response. We can test this out. We can load this up in Excel. I'm going to do just that here. And do the same kind of thing we did with the auto price predictions. So here's our web service. Click that. Tell it to use sample data. Select that range. So there's our data. I want to put the output in the O1 column. I'm going to auto predict and then hit predict, and it's going to populate that for me. And so there's scored probabilities, and there's the label of yes or no, are they a good bike buyer or not. So I'm going to hide this just so we can see all of this on the screen. And we'll start changing some of this. So the salary will drop down to 20,000. That didn't seem to impact anything. Maybe we're not predicting in real time here, but what we should see here is that that model will update just like in the last one. Now, I only have a few minutes left, so I do want to show you one more thing, and that is Power BI. I'm going to make April from our team a presenter here, and all right, so what you see here is a Power BI dashboard of that same data that we had in the machine learning model. So predicting whether we should send promotional material or not to a customer to buy a bike. Power BI is a BI visualization and analytics tool from Microsoft that is really just an incredible way to visualize any sort of data. It's a subscription service. It's like $10 a month per user, but there's a free tier as well. It's powerbi.com. But it's a great way to visualize data, and it's interactive. So for example, if we click the United Kingdom over here, it will update all of our data. It'll take a bit to update here, but it'll update all of our data, and we can see all of those graphs changing. Now, the interesting scenario here for something like machine learning is if we have an IoT scenario or a streaming scenario of some sort. This Power BI dashboard can be configured to process that streaming data, run it through a machine learning model. So maybe I'm doing sentiment analysis on Twitter, and I'm watching the Twitter stream coming through and analyzing in real time what's going on, basically. Or I'm looking for anomalies or keywords or something like that that's happening in that Twitter stream. I can do that in Power BI and see a dashboard that's updating in real time. Maybe it's IoT, and I'm looking for failures or potential failures of hardware in my environment. So it's a predictive maintenance sort of scenario. Then I can stream that data in and see that in real time in this Power BI dashboard. So Power BI is a wonderful tool. It's very similar to like working with Excel. So you'll see on the right-hand side I have a list of fields that are available to me in this dashboard, and I can build charts and graphs and see those and drag them kind of onto the canvas and edit those, edit this visual just kind of on the fly. So this is a wonderful tool for visualizing a machine learning scenario, but also just any sort of analytics that you may have, whether it's enterprise data warehousing or what have you in your organization.
Thank you for watching part 3 of this series. To catch the other parts, you can visit this URL. To learn how responsiveX can help you get started with machine learning, visit this link to explore an engagement.